Alrighty, if you're just coming over from the campfire chat, or if you just watched my recent video, I would recommend, if you haven't done so already, I think that this update is a massive W, but I want to talk about the things that you almost certainly missed from the campfire chat, because, well, most people don't have the luxury of literally doing this for their job, and if I couldn't bring you videos like this and information like this, I'd be completely valueless. But I'm positive that you missed things in this campfire chat that give us a kind of interesting bit of information that we weren't expecting. They didn't cover it in particular, but it relates most notably to like a very quick clip that we saw while they were doing the Helltide that I want to touch on, which I think points to a pretty cool change that I'm hoping is actually going to make it into the game. But on top of that, a change to legendary aspects and some of the new aspects coming this season that you've never seen before. I'm not sure if everybody else caught up on this, but basically we got a rundown of how the aspect system in the Codex of Power is going to change. Bloodshed was going through the gameplay here, showing the different features. And did you notice we got to see a lot of these aspects? Before we get into that, let me show you the very small thing that I think is pretty interesting that points to, again, just kind of a different approach to the game that I hope they kind of implement across the board. And it's when we saw 2 elixirs drop in the Helltide. But let me go ahead and give you a quick second, like a I Spy poster. What do you notice here that you've never seen before? Little, like cue the Jeopardy music here, like do do do. All right, I don't want to get DMCA'd. There is a new elixir that we have never seen before, as well as a change in the naming convention of a different elixir. And quite literally in real time, as I'm saying this, the same member of chat who found these elixir picks before found another one. So let me just go ahead and pull up that one and see how cool that is. But I want to touch on this because it's a very, very interesting change to how items are named in the game. But we have another clip here. Let's go ahead and watch this one. Alrighty, cool. So let's go ahead and talk about the first thing that I said, just because I want to keep this like kind of succinct here. One, we have Elixir of Momentum. Elixir of Momentum isn't a thing in the game. And most notably, it has a naming convention that I think is like pretty easy to kind of pick up on here. My best guess for Elixir of Momentum, again, this item that doesn't exist in the game, is either straight up movement speed, which would be pretty cool, or 2, interacts with different skill tags. Now, the developers said they basically added a bunch of skill tags and stuff. So there are now straight up mobility skills. There are evade skills as well. An Elixir of Momentum might be something that reduces cooldown on mobility skills or evade skills, although we already have that potion in the game. What I think is straight up just going to be movement speed, and it is yellow. Why is it yellow? I assume that yellow are elixirs that can only be dropped in the game. There are a ton of those from Helltides, as well as just normal monsters that can only be dropped and you can't craft them. But Elixir of Fortitude here, if I can just go back a real quick second. Elixir of Fortitude 2, Roman numeral 2. This is very different than the typical naming convention that we've seen for elixirs. You have like strong and weak and heady, like heady precision elixir. Which, while you can generally infer what that means, doesn't mean anything. It's probably really hard to localize. And if you literally don't know what that word means yourself, like heady, does every single person know what heady means? I personally do, but a lot of people don't. Elixir of Fortitude 2 probably just means that's the second tier of the elixir. So we'll probably now have tier 1, 2, 3, 4, etc., as opposed to those more archaic names. I think that blue is directly related to elixirs which you can craft, and yellow is related to elixirs that you can only drop. Very interesting enough, again, literally as we were just starting up this recording, the same chat member brought up the Elixir of Holy Bolts. Now, we saw that Tyrael's Might, the new uber unique in the game, basically gives you the artillery shrine effect. Whenever you attack, it shoots out bolts. I wouldn't be surprised if Elixir of Holy Bolts gives you the artillery effect. Now, what's cool about this is that artillery works based off of the type of skill that it is. So typically, if it's a skill that targets one thing, all the bolts will shoot inwards. If it's an AoE attack that goes out, the bolts will shoot outwards. And then if it is a frontal attack or a directional attack, it will shoot bolts in that direction. So if the Elixir of Holy Bolts effectively allows you to add the artillery shrine effect to your character without the increased attack speed that typically comes along with it, what that means is that you could take single target skills and turn them into AoE damage skills. You can take AoE damage skills that don't normally have like this extended range of effect and apply that to them as well. Or you can take your directional skills and just add on additional damage to them. Obviously, this is pure speculation, but I think it's interesting that we at least seen these two things, which is pretty radical considering they literally don't touch on it. I don't even think they were assuming that they would show this at this point. There's an interesting world where this might be a seasonal mechanic, which is something to be aware of, right? Since they're brand new elixirs, we don't know why they're currently in the game. They may either be permanent additions or something very specific to the season. Maybe it's related to this heart up here. Who knows? Also a cool new little icon, which I think this indicates the summoning circle for the Blood Maiden, which is like directly behind me that you can't see right there. But yeah, just a bunch of cool things to notice there. But welcome to the actual timestamp. Let's talk about the new aspects that were added into the game that you probably didn't catch on, because some of them are pretty cool and they've made changes and just like generally buff some aspects. And while we didn't see all of them, we saw a pretty decent small amount of them here. I'll go ahead and include a link to this as well, just so that people can see it. It'll also be in my Discord. If you're not already in my Discord, it's down in the description below. Always be plugging. But we have 3 new aspects that we had never seen. 1 effectively completely changed aspect, and then just buffs to existing aspects. So starting off with the Necromancer, we have a straight up new aspect, which again, I think is going to be the seasonal journey aspect. It is called Aphotic. Aphotic also like brings into question some very cool design changes for the Necro, but we can't really delve into it because we don't have more information. But this says when you use Skeletal Priest, so the ability that says when you have maximum skeletons, heal them by summoning this little like ethereal priest that shoots up. You will empower your warriors so that their attacks now deal shadow damage and have a chance to stun. One of the biggest issues with Necromancer minions is that there's a lot of like shadow skill and darkness and shadow blight overlap, but it's only ever worked for the shadow mages since they're the only ones who can do shadow aligned damage. Now, your skeletal warriors, if you use this utility aspect, will also be able to do shadow damage, meaning that they will be able to help you out with applying Shadow Blight procs. Since your Reapers can also do AoE damage, that should help with triggering Shadow Blight multiple times more quickly to get your Blighted aspect up. Obviously, like the actual impact of all of that is very hard to kind of parse out just because we don't know what it's going to look like. But I really enjoy this. It's similar in the vein of the change that they made to Iron Maiden, which is allowing it to turn that into a shadow skill and for it to do shadow damage, or rather a darkness skill. So I just like this ability to be able to customize your damage types, customize your triggering effects from your character, and change up the base functionality of things without everything just needing to be a damage multiplier. For the other new aspects that we have 2 more. For the Sorceress, we're gaining Concentration. This is a defensive aspect. And it says that your conjuration skills grant you up to 25% damage reduction. Now, remember the fact that they said that damage reduction is going to become a lot more rare of a stat. It's going to be a lot more special, harder to get. So they're thinking about changing up how defensive stats work in this game in general, which obviously is going to have a huge impact on like what your build looks like, how much of it can you use just for straight power as opposed to survivability. So just being able to use conjuration skills to have some time limit worth of damage reduction. This is similar to the might aspect, which says when you use a basic skill, gain damage reduction as well, right? Very similar vein there. And then we have what is seemingly a new general aspect here. It was called Concussive Strikes. When we were looking in the menu, it didn't show a class icon as opposed to having a class icon for the other ones that we're able to see. I did think Concussive Strikes would either be like a rogue or a barbarian thing, right? Concussion from like blackjacking somebody, knocking them out, or just big hammer smash. But it's a utility aspect, and what it says is that damaging an enemy has a chance to daze them, something that was pretty typically only a rogue thing, and that you also deal increased damage to dazed enemies. So this is similar to smiting. You have a chance to be able to apply stun, and that you deal more damage to stunned enemies. So nothing like wildly new, but being able to add a new crowd control type to a target that your build otherwise couldn't gain access to, theoretically could unlock some stats in the game, as well as just open up the space for being able to optimize builds in different ways or interact with new uniques that come to the game, etc., etc. From the aspects that we saw, we got a lot of Barbarian aspects being changed. So Ancestral Charge, the offensive aspect, just has a bit of a damage boost here. Ancestral Force similarly had a very small damage boost. It looks like they just increased how much damage it dealt by 2% as far as I could tell. I'm not a Barbarian, so Barbarians, like down in the comments, let me know if you think that this was wrong. Anemia, being a utility aspect, used to just apply to bleeding enemies, but it now also applies to vulnerable enemies, opening up this like additional damage source for builds that aren't seeking to apply bleed, which I think is generally pretty cool. For the rogue, the arrow storms aspect, and this one is a little bit hard to tell. Again, I don't play the rogue a lot, as well as the descriptions in the actual Codex of Power are different than the ones on the items. They're a bit more truncated, but what it basically said is that arrow storms in general now do more damage as well. So I assume that not only the procced arrow storms from the aspect itself, but just being able to use that skill should have some type of damage multiplier added onto it. For the sorceress, you had Conflagration, which basically said as long as you were channeling Incinerate, you dealt more damage to burning enemies. They added on a second functionality here, which says that if an enemy is killed while you are channeling Incinerate on them, they are going to explode, applying burning damage to surrounding enemies, adding on additional AoE and clear speed to this skill, which is otherwise pretty clunky because you have to sit there and channeling. So anything that takes like your line target damage and allows you to deal AoE damage around it is obviously like a pretty huge change in the overall functionality of that skill as it stands. For the Barbarian, you had Giant Strides, which said basically when you hit monsters with this skill, you would reduce cooldown up to a maximum. And what they added onto it is that hitting a boss also reduced cooldown by that same maximum value, whereas previously, you would only ever get the you hit one monster proc of it, which is basically the minimum amount of cooldown reduction that you would gain. Bounding Conduit for the Sorceress was also changed. So what it was changed to is that your teleport's cooldown is just reduced by an amount, and then after teleporting, Crackling Energy will hit additional enemies. I think previously it said after you teleport, you gained movement speed. This one just seems to be able to like add back into that playstyle of constantly telestomping into areas and outputting damage. And then lastly, for the Sorceress as well, Charged just has a very slight increase to its movement speed. So the three new aspects right away, obviously all of these numbers are like absolutely going to change in some way, shape, or form, especially after we test them out on the PTR. But this is a nice little sampling, a little secret taste of what we can see. Changes to probably some of their more underused aspects across the board, as well as additional functionality that allows some aspects to fit into more categories and to enable more types of builds than they were able to previously. Maybe they were a bit too niche, and now this opens it up for more builds to be able to play around and use them. I wish that we could get like more specifics. It looks like they literally have every single aspect here, but they don't actually go through and show all of them. I don't think that the devs were necessarily expecting us to like delve this deeply into the details of what they showed. Or maybe they're just like FNAF theorists now, and they're super good at leaving these little tidbits for us to like break down. It definitely gave me more stuff to talk about. Let me know down in the comments what you were excited to see. What aspects are you hoping will actually get these same types of love? Again, my most favorite thing is whenever an aspect takes a core functionality and either modifies it or opens it up to different modifiers or different status effects or makes you do different types of damage. I think that those are infinitely more interesting than just your damage does X% more, because obviously those have to be in the game, but I think they're generally pretty boring. And I'd rather see more things like this. So let me know down in the comments what you're hoping to see. Obviously, we're going to be getting the patch notes in a week, but if you're like me, just like an absolute junkie for all this stuff, you can't wait. So I'm going to keep pouring over stuff, see if I can find anything else. Again, shout out to my chat members who pointed out the elixirs. That was a huge find. If you saw anything in the campfire chat that you feel like other people didn't pick up on or wasn't touched on, also let me know down there. Give me a timestamp. Hopefully I can make another one of these where we can pick out more information. But yeah, there you go. I just want to bring this stuff out to people who might have missed this kind of stuff since it wasn't directly touched on. But thank you so much for watching this video. If you like what you saw, consider subscribing to the channel, leaving a like on it as well. And as always, I look forward to seeing you in the next video.